My name is Amara Reyes, and I'm 32 years old, a proud daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants, born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. My story isn't just about revenge. It's about dignity, identity, and what happens when you stop asking people to accept you and start showing them exactly who you are. I met James Whitmore when I was 25. He was sweet, respectful, soft, spoken, the kind of man who opened doors, remembered your coffee order, and made you feel seen in a crowd. We met at a community fundraiser where I'd volunteered to bake for the auction table. James bought a box of my guava empanadas, complimented me so awkwardly that it was charming, and by the end of the night, we were sitting on the curb outside laughing over melted pastelillos. I didn't fall for his last name, or his family's money, or the way he dressed like he stepped out of a country club catalog. I fell for him, the man, not the name, but the name came with a family I would never be allowed to forget. The first time I visited their estate in Connecticut, a mansion with marble steps, a heated driveway, and a housekeeper who looked more comfortable around the dog than me, I told myself to be calm. I had my hair pressed, wore pearl studs instead of my usual hoops, and brought a bottle of Tempranillo wrapped in ribbon. My abuela always said, when you're entering someone else's castle, walk proud like it's your own. Still, the door opened and judgment poured out like cold air. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, looked me up and down. You must be Ahmad Ah, she said, drawing out the syllables like my name was a foreign object she didn't want to touch. It's Amara, I said politely, offering the wine. She took it like it was ticking. His sister, Caroline, didn't even say hello. She looked at my shoes, my earrings, and then gave James a look like he'd brought home a novelty item. His father, Thomas, asked where I went to school before I could even sit down, not out of interest, but out of sorting. I told them I had a degree in culinary business and marketing from a local college in San Antonio. Oh, his mother replied, a trade degree. That night at dinner, I tried to share stories from home, how my family used to throw block-wide cookouts with domino tables and salsa music loud enough to make the neighbors dance. Margaret smiled the kind of smile that never reached her eyes and said, so festive. Caroline leaned over to her husband and whispered something. They both laughed into their wine glasses, but it was when I heard them mimic my accent later that night that the denial broke. I had gone upstairs to grab my cardigan. As I came down the hallway, I heard Caroline say in a mock voice, AZP's lemon esque, wheezy. Then she laughed, I swear, she talks like a cartoon. Like she's in a taco commercial. James chuckled weakly. She's just passionate. It's part of her charm. My chest burned. I didn't say anything, not then. Because when you grow up being the other, you learn to freeze your face. You smile through the sting. You convince yourself you're being sensitive. And James, he always told me they meant well, that it was just their humor, that I shouldn't let it get to me, but it did. Every visit, every comment. Every moment I had to repeat myself at the dinner table while his father pretended not to understand the way I pronounced entrepreneur. Every time I caught Margaret rolling her eyes when I said y'all. Every time someone brought up spicy Latina temper, like I was a walking stereotype from a reality show. And the worst part, James never stopped them, never corrected them. He always said I was imagining it, that I was overthinking, that it was better not to cause waves. So I silenced myself, softened my vowels, toned down my stories, wore beige when I wanted bold. I even stopped bringing dishes from home to family holidays. The last time I brought Eris Congangeles, Margaret said, oh, I didn't realize we were doing ethnic cuisine. By the 3rd year of our marriage, I had stopped speaking in Spanish in front of them altogether. But the final straw came on Christmas Eve, when Caroline posted a photo online of all the Whitmore women baking gingerbread cookies in matching flannel pajamas. Everyone was tagged except me. I had been in the kitchen that whole day. I'd decorated cookies with their nieces. I'd cleaned up the mess. But when I asked James about it, he shrugged and said, don't take it personally. They're just used to family traditions. That's when I realized what I had really married into. I wasn't just being excluded, I was being erased, smiled at, mocked, polished out of their perfect picture, and it was time I stopped shrinking, because I wasn't going to beg for space in their world anymore. I was going to build my own, and soon it would be right next door. It was New Year's Eve, one of those pristine, candle-lit family events that the Whitmores hosted like they were running a pageant. The dinner table looked like a Martha Stewart magazine cover. Ivory napkins folded like orchids, crystal flutes lined up with surgical precision, and a silent tension that clung to every corner of the room like expensive perfume. I had just excused myself to the bathroom after passing around a tray of home-made Tres Leches cupcakes I'd spent all day perfecting. Of course, no one touched them. Margaret had pre-ordered desserts from some boutique French bakery in Greenwich, and Caroline had loudly told everyone she was watching sugar this year anyway. But I smiled. I always smiled. That's what I did when they belittled my food, my stories, my voice. Until that night, I was walking back down the hallway toward the dining room when I heard laughter coming from the den. At first, I thought it was about the usual holiday gossip, someone's divorce, or Elise's buttocks budget. But then I heard my name clear as a bell, Amara's Cupcakes, Caroline snorted. I mean, did you see the frosting? It was sliding off the top like it was trying to escape. More laughter. Then came Margaret's voice, elegant, clipped, and dripping with venom disguised as wit. I just think it's adorable that she still tries. Every year she brings something from home, as if she's auditioning for a part in the family she already married into. Then Thomas, well, she did marry up. Caroline, bless her heart, she still talks like she's narrating a telenovela. Yemin, I make dis cake con macho. Everyone burst out laughing. That was it. I froze in the hallway, heart pounding in my chest, mouth dry. For a second, I couldn't move. It wasn't just what they said, it was how freely they said it. Like they'd been waiting for the moment I'd step out of earshot so they could rip me apart without restraint. And James was in the room, laughing. Not full belly laughter, no, nothing bold, but the worst kind, the quiet, complicit chuckle, the go along to get along kind. That was the moment something snapped to me. Because I had spent 6 years of marriage trying to become digestible to people who would never, ever see me as anything but the girl with the accent. I had diluted my voice, buried my pride, dressed like them, hosted like them, smiled through everything like them, and still, I was their favorite joke behind closed doors. I backed away from the den, walked upstairs to the guest room James and I had been staying in, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, stomach hollow, and I made a promise to myself, never again would I shrink my voice to fit in, never again would I sit silent while being erased. Never again would I wait for James to defend me. He had shown me exactly who he was, not a protector, but a placeholder, a man more afraid of rocking the boat than anchoring his wife. I stared at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, the soft curls I'd straightened for Margaret's approval, the nude lipstick I wore instead of my usual deep red, the beige dress that matched their tablecloths. I didn't even recognize the woman looking back at me, but underneath all that politeness was fire. I could feel it rising, because what they didn't know was that I had spent the last 2 years building something quietly, powerfully, in the background of their cruelty. Something they never asked about because they never thought I was capable of more than a holiday casserole. They didn't know about the catering company I'd started on the side, using recipes passed down from my mother and grandmother, recipes that told stories in every spice. They didn't know I'd been taking real estate classes at night, investing in small properties back in Texas. They didn't know that my last 2 pop-ups sold out before noon, and that a regional food blog had just interviewed me for a spotlight series on Latino-owned businesses. They didn't ask, they assumed, because to them, I would always be the outsider, the joke with a rolling R and too much seasoning in her food. But that night, while they laughed in the den, I started writing the email that would set everything in motion. An inquiry to the real estate agent I'd been following in their neighborhood for months. I had seen it in passing, a red brick colonial style home just down the street from theirs, beautiful, slightly aged, a little forgotten. Like me, it had gone up for private listing over the holidays. The timing was perfect. It would take all my savings, a small business loan, and the guts of a woman finally done begging for a chair at someone else's table. I hit send on that email before midnight, and just before the ball dropped on a new year, I took off the earrings Margaret gave me as a passive-aggressive wedding gift, wiped off the lipstick that wasn't mine, and finally smiled like a woman who knew what came next. They thought they'd humiliated me one last time, but what they didn't know was, the next time they'd laugh it would be from the porch of the house next door. The morning after I sent that email to the real estate agent, I hardly slept. It was a restless night of pacing and imagining what it would feel like to walk through those doors and claim a space that had once felt utterly out of reach. For years, I had been a shadow and unwelcome one trailing behind the laughter and whispered insults of my husband's family. But now, with a single move, I was about to step out of the shadows and into the light they never thought I deserved. 2 weeks later, the agent called with news that felt like a quiet thunderclap in my chest. The seller accepted my offer. Full price, cash in hand, no conditions. They were eager to close quickly, and I was more than ready. Driving up the tree-lined street for the first time as the new owner of the house next door, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. This was more than a real estate transaction. It was a reclamation of my dignity. The house was beautiful but needed work. The paint was peeling on the shutters, the garden was overgrown, and the porch steps creaked with every step. But it was mine. I walked through each room like a conqueror in a kingdom newly claimed. The sun streamed through large windows, casting golden light on worn hardwood floors and dusty chandeliers. It whispered promises of new beginnings and unbreakable strength. Setting up my new home became a mission, a physical manifestation of all the late nights and sacrifices that had led to this moment. Each paint stroke, every planted flower, was a statement. I was here to stay. I wasn't just the woman with the accent anymore. I was a woman with a vision and the power to turn it into reality. Meanwhile, word started to spread. At the next family gathering, which, naturally, I wasn't invited to, I heard through the grapevine that my purchase was the talk of the town. The same voices that once mocked my accent and dismissed my background were now murmuring in disbelief. "Oh, have you heard? Amira bought the house next door." Margaret whispered to a friend, "Honestly, I didn't think she had it in her." Caroline scoffed over brunch with her sister Elise. "I guess she's finally making a name for herself, not that it's our problem." Even James mentioned it quietly when I saw him at the grocery store. "I didn't realize you were serious about real estate," he said, eyes avoiding mine. But I didn't need his approval anymore. The house next door wasn't just property, it was a symbol, a testament to years of silent endurance and quiet hustle. It was the sound of every insult I'd swallowed being turned into fuel for my fire. I started hosting small gatherings in my new home, dinners with friends, business meetings for my catering company, community events celebrating cultural heritage. Slowly, the house became a hub of life and warmth, starkly contrasting the cold formality of the Whitmore estate next door. And every time I heard laughter coming from their windows, I reminded myself it was no longer at my expense. On weekends, I'd walk over to the Whitmore home, which always seemed frozen in time, the manicured lawn untouched, the windows heavy with curtains. I imagined what must be running through their minds. The girl they dismissed was now their neighbor, a woman who didn't just survive but thrived. But I wasn't content with just owning property. I was building a legacy. I expanded my catering business, opening a small cafe inside the new house, a warm, vibrant space where the community gathered to share stories, food, and laughter. The menu celebrated my heritage unapologetically, each dish a flavor, packed reminder of where I came from and the journey I'd taken. Social media took notice. Photos of the quaint porch adorned with string lights, the bustling kitchen filled with smiling faces, and the success stories of a woman who refused to be silenced started circulating online. Messages poured in from women who had faced similar exclusion, women who had been mocked for their backgrounds or told they didn't belong. They thanked me for showing them what it meant to take control of their narrative. Through all of this, the Whitmore family's whispers turned into uneasy silence. Invitations to events stopped coming, entirely a quiet acknowledgement of my rising power. And James, he never stopped by. Not once. I didn't seek his approval, but part of me wondered if he realized how wrong he'd been, how the woman he took for granted had transformed into someone unstoppable. Owning that house was more than a victory. It was freedom. Every morning, as I brewed my coffee on the porch and watched the sun rise over the quiet street, I felt a deep peace settle in my bones. I was home, not just in a house, but in myself. They had mocked me for my accent, for my roots, for being different. But now, with the keys in my hand and the future wide open, the only thing that echoed between those two homes was the sound of my own victory loud, clear and impossible to ignore. Owning the house next door wasn't just a win on paper. It was the foundation of a new life that I was building from scratch on my own terms. I was determined not to just be their neighbor. I wanted to be someone they could no longer ignore or belittle. From the moment I moved in, I threw myself into creating a life that would not only uplift me but challenge every stereotype and insult that had been thrown my way for years. I started by turning the once forgotten house into a thriving hub. The renovation was more than just about fresh paint and new furniture. It was about reclaiming my identity. Every detail, from the colorful curtains I chose to the art I hung on the walls, spoke of resilience and pride in my heritage. I wasn't hiding who I was anymore. I was showing the world exactly who I had become. Next, I poured my energy into expanding my catering business. What began as a modest side hustle quickly blossomed into a full-time endeavor. I hired a small team of talented chefs and servers, many of whom were women like me, underestimated, overlooked, and hungry for success. We crafted menus that celebrated our culture, mixing traditional recipes with modern twists. Word spread quickly about the little restaurant in the house next door, and soon we were hosting busy weekend brunches and themed dinner nights. But success was never enough on its own. I wanted my husband's family to feel it, to confront the fact that the woman they had mocked and dismissed was now a force to be reckoned with. So I began inviting key family members on my terms, of course. Casual meetups, business events, and neighborhood gatherings became opportunities for them to see the woman they once scorned. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Their old biases ran deep, but I was patient and unrelenting. At the first dinner party I hosted, I made sure the atmosphere was warm and inviting, but also unmistakably clear who was in charge. The dining table was set with vibrant flowers, the scent of freshly cooked dishes filled the air, and the music was a mix of upbeat beats and soulful melodies from my childhood. My guests were surprised, even a little taken aback. This wasn't the shy, unsure woman they thought I was. This was someone confident, proud, and unapologetically herself. Tyler was there that night, of course. Watching his family's faces as they tasted the food, laughed, and shared stories was a quiet kind of satisfaction. I caught his eye across the room. The flicker of surprise, maybe even respect, was unmistakable. It wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. It was about rewriting the narrative. I spoke openly about my journey, the sacrifices I'd made, and the work I'd put in to get where I was. I let my success speak for itself, but I also shared my story, the challenges, the heartbreaks, and the moments when I doubted myself but kept going. Slowly, the conversation shifted. Instead of whispered insults or dismissive glances, I heard questions. Genuine curiosity, even compliments. One afternoon, Celeste showed up unannounced, carrying a bottle of wine and a small, hesitant smile. She stayed for hours, asking about the recipes, the business, and even my plans for the future. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first crack in the icy facade that had defined her for years. Elise started following my social media accounts. I noticed her liking posts, sharing photos, and even sending a direct message, something simple, like a compliment on a recent dish I'd posted. It was progress. I made sure to keep my boundaries firm, though. I wasn't interested in their approval, not really. What I wanted was respect, and that came from showing strength, dignity, and unwavering self-worth. And Tyler, he changed too. Watching me build my empire and own my space, he began to see me differently, no longer just the woman beside him, but a powerful individual in her own right. Our relationship grew stronger, based on mutual respect instead of old expectations. Most importantly, I learned to love myself in ways I never had before. I wasn't the woman they mocked or underestimated. I was the woman who made them see me on my terms. Every day in that house next door, surrounded by the life I created, was a reminder that I was no longer living in their shadows. I was shining bright, bold, and unstoppable. For years, I had endured the cold whispers, the side dies, and the sharp remarks about my accent, my background, and my place in Tyler's family. I was the outsider they thought they could belittle and silence. But owning the house next door and building my business was only part of the story. The true victory would come when they couldn't help but hear me, when my success wouldn't just be seen but felt, loud and clear. The moment I stepped into the public spotlight was both exhilarating and terrifying. I wasn't just fighting for respect in a quiet neighborhood anymore. I was stepping onto a stage where everyone could see, hear, and judge my every move. But I was ready. I was done hiding. I started by sharing my story online, on social media, in local news features, wherever I could find an audience. I wrote about the years of feeling invisible, the sting of being mocked, and the quiet strength it took to rise above. I wasn't just telling my story to gain sympathy. I was telling it to reclaim my voice and inspire others who had been told they didn't belong. My first viral post was a simple video, me standing in my kitchen, speaking directly to the camera with my accent proud and clear, sharing how my family's mockery had fueled my fire. The message was raw and real, and it hit a nerve. Comments poured in, messages from women who'd been through the same pain, men who'd felt underestimated, and strangers who saw their own struggles reflected in my words. That video was the beginning of what would become the Win Next Door series, a collection of posts, videos, and live talks where I shared the ups and downs of building a business, balancing family, and standing tall despite the odds. I wasn't just a businesswoman. I was a symbol of resilience, and people connected with that. Meanwhile, back in my neighborhood, the sound of my success was impossible to ignore. My catering business expanded rapidly, and the house next door buzzed with energy, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses at dinner parties, and the bustling footsteps of my growing team. My clients raved about the flavors, the atmosphere, the way every event felt like a celebration of culture and courage. Tyler's family would drive by sometimes, curious or maybe even cautious, eyes flickering toward the source of the noise and light. I wasn't sure if they envied it or resented it more, but I didn't care. I was no longer living for their approval. I was living for myself. One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. Celeste had reached out through a mutual acquaintance, asking if I'd speak at a community event about entrepreneurship and overcoming adversity. Part of me hesitated. After all, this was the woman who had mocked my accent for years. But I accepted. If they wanted to see who I really was, I would show them. The day of the event, the auditorium was packed. I stood at the podium, heart pounding, and looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, all waiting. I told my story with honesty and passion, letting my accent be a badge of honor rather than a target for ridicule. I talked about the long nights, the failures, the moments I wanted to quit, and the triumphs that made it all worthwhile. When I finished, the applause was overwhelming. But what struck me most was the sight of Tyler's family in the back row, their faces a mix of surprise, respect, and maybe a little shame. They could no longer dismiss me as the woman with the funny accent or the charity case. I was a leader, a role model, a woman who had rewritten her story. From that day forward, my relationship with Tyler's family began to shift. They still had their quirks and prejudices, but they could no longer ignore the truth. I was here to stay, and I was winning. But the best part, I wasn't just winning for me. I was winning for every girl who had been told her voice wasn't good enough, for every immigrant who had been made to feel invisible, and for every woman who had been underestimated because of where she came from or how she spoke. I was a testament to the power of perseverance and pride, and I made sure my victory was heard loud and clear, just next door. After years of enduring their whispers, their snide remarks, and the subtle but cutting jabs at my accent and background, I was finally in a place where I could not only stand tall, but make my victory impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about owning a house next door It was about reclaiming my dignity, rewriting my story, and proving that their judgmental voices couldn't dictate my worth. When I signed the papers for the house, I felt a surge of emotions, vindication, relief, and a quiet but fierce satisfaction. The same family that had treated me like an outsider for so long suddenly had to face the fact that the woman they'd mocked was now their literal neighbor. I wasn't just there, I was there to stay. The house wasn't just a symbol, it was my fortress. I poured my heart into renovating it, turning it into a reflection of who I was, strong, independent, and unapologetically proud of my roots. I chose colors, furnishings, and decor that blended modern elegance with cultural touches that celebrated my heritage, the very thing they had mocked. But I didn't stop at just owning the house. I knew that true victory was about visibility, so I threw open the doors, hosting gatherings that became the talk of the neighborhood. Family events, community barbecues, and even holiday parties. Each was a reminder that I wasn't just an invisible guest in their world anymore. I was an active, respected member of the community, a successful woman who refused to be sidelined. Word got around fast. The same people who once whispered about my funny accent now asked for invitations. I watched as my husband's family awkwardly attended these events, their usual smugness replaced by hesitant smiles and reluctant greetings. Some tried to ignore me, others tried to be friendly, but none could deny the change. More importantly, my husband saw it too. The man who once laughed off their cruelty, who told me to just ignore it, now understood the full weight of their behavior. He saw the strength it took for me to keep pushing, to keep building, and to turn their cruelty into fuel for my success. But my victory wasn't about making them jealous or hurt. It was about healing. I had spent too many years shrinking myself, trying to fit into a mold they'd made for me. Now I was breaking free. My voice, my accent, my culture. They were no longer weaknesses, but badges of honor. The house next door became a beacon, a reminder to anyone who doubted me that I was more than their jokes and insults. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, and they could hear it in every laugh, every toast, and every moment I celebrated life on my terms. Through this journey, I also found a deeper connection with my husband. As we navigated the new dynamics with his family, we learned to communicate better, to support each other, and to build a relationship grounded in respect and love. He apologized for his earlier indifference, and I forgave, but only because I had finally found my own strength. Looking back, the years of mockery and exclusion were painful, but they shaped the woman I became. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation or bitterness. It's success and confidence that no one can take away. Now, whenever I hear the faint echoes of those old insults, I smile. Because they didn't break me. Instead, they gave me the drive to rise higher than I ever thought possible. And as I sit on my porch, watching the sunset from my new home, I know one thing for sure. They'll always hear me win loud and clear.